They judged him by the fraying cuffs of his tweed jacket and saw a ghost from a bygone era. The real estate scions at the central booth, men who measured worth in square footage and demolition permits, openly snickered at his presence. The manager, a man whose spine was made of gelatin and ambition, tried to tuck him away like a dirty secret. The whole world, it seemed, had decided he was invisible. They assumed he was just another lost, elderly French tourist, his ears deaf to their casual cruelty, his mind clouded by age. But their calculations contained a fatal flaw, a variable they couldn't possibly comprehend. They were unaware that the quiet young woman refilling their Pellegrino, Ilara Vance, carried the ghost of a different life within her, a life spent in the hallowed halls of the Sorbonne, her hands stained with the ink of forgotten histories. And they most certainly had no idea that the nobody they were dismissing was Alistair Dubois, the reclusive titan of industry, the very man who held the deed to the historic building they planned to bulldoze, and with it, the fate of their entire empire. When the waitress finally broke her silence, her voice flowing in the flawless, academic French of a Parisian scholar, the hush that fell over the restaurant wasn't just uncomfortable. It was the sound of a dynasty beginning to crumble. This is the story of how a small act of decency unearthed a forgotten masterpiece and dismantled a mountain of greed. The midday service at Aurelia, a gilded cage of culinary pretension in the heart of Manhattan, was a battlefield disguised as a dining room. The ammunition was platinum credit cards, the body count tallied in broken spirits and blistered feet. Ilara, known to her colleagues as Ellie, smoothed the starched white linen of her apron, a futile attempt to conceal a small coffee stain that felt like a brand of her current station in life. At 28, she was a repository of useless knowledge, an expert in French Rococo art history, serving foie gras to men who wouldn't know Fragonard from a frappuccino. Her job was to be a phantom, a pair of hands that materialized with bread baskets and vanished before the conversation resumed. "Girl, over here. The ice in my water has melted. Are you trying to poison me with lukewarm tap?" The voice, a gravelly boom accustomed to being obeyed, erupted from the restaurant's most coveted table. It belonged to Marcus Thorne, patriarch of Thorne Development Group. He was a man carved from granite and arrogance, his face a permanent sneer, his custom-tailored suit stretched taut over a frame built by steak dinners and contempt for the world. Flanking him were his two sons, Julian and Leo, younger, sleeker versions of their father, their expressions a mixture of boredom and predatory instinct. "My sincerest apologies, Mr. Thorne," Ellie said, her voice a practiced, neutral murmur as she glided over with a fresh pitcher. The condensation dripped onto her already aching fingers. "I'll replace it for you immediately." "See that you do," Julian smirked, not even bothering to look at her, his eyes fixed on his phone. "And tell the sommelier we need another bottle of the Montrachet. The last one was adequate." Adequate was a bottle that cost more than Ellie's monthly rent. She nodded, her face a mask of professional deference, and retreated. As she rounded the monolithic marble bar, she nearly stumbled over a man hovering uncertainly by the host stand. The hostess, a formidable woman named Clarissa, whose smile was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass, was deliberately ignoring him, her attention fixed on rearranging menus that were already perfectly aligned. The man was an anomaly in Aurelia's curated world of aggressive modernity. He was likely in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair that looked as if it had been sculpted by a brisk sea wind. He wore a tweed jacket, well made but softened with age, and a simple wool scarf was knotted loosely at his neck. He didn't look destitute, but in a room shimmering with Rolexes and Italian leather, he looked profoundly, almost tragically, out of time. "Pardon, mademoiselle," the man said, his voice soft, a gentle rasp layered with a thick, melodic accent. "I believe I have a reservation. The name is Dubois." Clarissa's eyes flickered over him, a swift, dismissive appraisal. "One moment," she said, her tone suggesting it would be a very long moment. She picked up a phone, turning her back to him completely. The man simply waited, clutching a small, worn, leather-bound book to his chest. He looked less like a patron and more like a retired professor who had wandered in by mistake, searching for a quiet library. A familiar ache resonated in Ellie's chest, the sting of being overlooked, of being deemed unworthy of a second glance. It was a feeling she knew all too well. She discreetly approached the host stand. "Clarissa," she whispered, "that gentleman has been waiting for quite some time." Clarissa sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured stress. She finally turned to the man. "Name again?" "Dubois," he repeated patiently. "Alistair." Clarissa tapped a long, blood-red nail on her tablet screen. "I don't have a Dubois. I have a Dubois for one at 1:30. The deliberate mangling of his name was a petty power play, a small cruelty to assert her dominance. "Ah, yes. That would be me," the man said with a polite nod, seemingly oblivious to the insult. "Right, well, we're completely booked," Clarissa lied smoothly. "The only table I can offer you is number 17. Table 17 was Aurelia's Siberia. Tucked away in a dark alcove beside the clattering, swinging doors to the kitchen, it was directly in the path of every server and busboy, and suffered from a persistent, mysterious draft. It was the table reserved for tourists who used coupons and couples on the verge of a breakup. "That will be perfectly acceptable," the man said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips as he pulled his scarf a little tighter. As he was led to his corner of exile, he had to pass the Thorne family's table. Marcus Thorne watched his approach like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Marcus boomed, his voice carrying across the hushed dining room. "Did the History Museum lose one of its exhibits?" Julian and Leo erupted in sycophantic laughter. "Careful, Dad," Julian jeered. "That jacket might be a protected historical artifact." The old man stopped for a fraction of a second. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them. But Ellie, ever the observer, saw the muscles in his back tighten, his grip on his leather book so fierce his knuckles shone white. Then, with a quiet dignity that was utterly lost on his tormentors, he continued his slow walk to the worst table in the house. A hot flush of anger crept up Ellie's neck. It was more than just rudeness. It was a gleeful, targeted cruelty. She glanced towards the manager, Mr. Abernathy, who was currently fawning over a city councilwoman, his eyes darting away from the scene. The Thornes were planning a new skyscraper development downtown. Their account was worth hundreds of thousands to the restaurant. The old man in the tweed coat might order a soup and a coffee. In Abernathy's cold, hard calculus, the insult was not only permissible, it was profitable. Ellie grabbed a water pitcher and a menu. "I'll take table 17, she told a passing waiter. "Your funeral," he muttered. "He looks like he'll tip you in lint." She walked over to the small, unsteady table. The constant swinging of the kitchen doors created a vortex of noise and smells. Garlic, bleach, the clang of dropped pans. The man was staring at the menu, but his eyes seemed to be looking through it, at a point far in the distance. "Good afternoon, sir," Ellie said, forcing a warmth into her voice that she didn't feel. She set the water glass down with a gentle click, a deliberate contrast to the usual clatter of service. "My name is Ellie. I do apologize for the location of this table. As soon as something better becomes available, I would be happy to move you." The man looked up, and for the first time she saw his eyes. They were a startling, crystalline blue, as sharp and clear as a winter sky. They held an unnerving intelligence that seemed at odds with his tired, unassuming demeanor. His gaze flickered to her name tag, then back to her face. "Thank you, Ellie," he said, his pronunciation perfect, the syllables soft. "But please, do not trouble yourself. I am quite accustomed to, how do you say, the draft." He offered another one of those small, sad smiles. It was a smile that knew the world's disappointments intimately. "May I get you something to drink to start? A glass of wine, perhaps?" He hesitated, his eyes briefly scanning the exorbitant prices on the wine list. "Just a coffee, thank you. Black, and the soup à l'oignon, if you please." "An excellent choice," Ellie said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. The onion soup was a salty, greasy concoction made from powdered stock, a disgrace to its French origins, but she couldn't bear to disappoint him further. "I'll make sure the kitchen makes it extra hot for you." As she retreated, she was intercepted by Julian Thorne, who snapped his fingers an inch from her face. "Hey, you. We need more bread. And tell your manager that my father is finding the view from his table distracting." He jutted his chin towards the old man, who was now quietly writing in his leather-bound book. "It's depressing, bad for the digestion. He is simply enjoying his lunch, Mr. Thorne," Ellie replied, her voice dangerously tight. "He's an eyesore," Marcus Thorne cut in, leaning back in his chair. "This is Aurelia, not a damn homeless shelter. Probably doesn't even speak English, just sits there, scribbling his manifesto." He then turned his attention to his sons, his voice rising to a performative pitch. "This is exactly the problem with these preservationist nuts. They're like him, old, dusty, stuck in the past. They don't understand that progress means tearing down the old to make way for the new. That's why we're going to win the bid for the old Argent building. The city council knows progress. The French who built it were probably too busy drinking wine to make it earthquake-proof anyway." Ellie's hands balled into fists at her sides. She needed this job. Her grandfather's nursing home bills were a mountain of debt she was slowly, painfully chipping away at. Every dollar, every tip mattered. She needed Marcus Thorne to be happy. But as she looked back at Table 17, at the dignified old man being treated like refuse, a quiet rebellion sparked within her. She wouldn't just serve him. She would give him the service Marcus Thorne thought he was paying for. She marched into the chaotic kitchen. "Miguel," she called out to the grizzled head chef. "Table 17, 1 onion soup. But Miguel, please. For me. Make it with the real beef stock, the one you save for the coq au vin, a little extra gruyere, the way your grandmother used to make it." Miguel, a man who communicated primarily in grunts and curses, looked at her, then at the ticket. "For the old guy in the corner, Abernathy will have my head for using the good stuff." "Please," Ellie said softly. "The man is having a very bad day." Miguel stared at her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. 5 minutes. "For you, Ellie." "Not for him." She prepared the coffee herself, warming the ceramic cup with hot water first. She added 2 delicate almond biscotti to the saucer, a small luxury normally reserved for VIPs. When she returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had curdled further. Marcus Thorne was now loudly complaining about European business practices, peppering his monologue with a grotesquely exaggerated French accent. The man at Table 17 had set down his pen. He was just sitting there, staring into space, looking terribly, achingly alone. Ellie approached the table and placed the coffee service down with the care of a museum curator, handling a priceless artifact. Then she took a breath and plunged into the past, into the life she thought she had left behind. "Monsieur," she began, her voice dropping, the flat American accent dissolving into the soft, nuanced cadence of perfect Parisian French. Veuillez m'excuser pour l'attente. J'ai demandé au chef de vous préparer la soupe spécialement. C'est bien meilleur ainsi. Sir, please forgive the wait. I asked the chef to prepare the soup, especially for you. It's much better this way. The man's head shot up. The pen he was holding slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the floor. The weariness in his blue eyes vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a uniform, but as a person. Vous parlez français, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. You speak French? A genuine smile, the first she had felt all day, bloomed on Ellie's face. The cacophony of Aurelia seemed to fade into a distant hum. Oui, monsieur. J'ai étudié l'histoire de l'art à la Sorbonne. Ma spécialité était la période rococo. Yes, sir. I studied art history at the Sorbonne. My specialty was the rococo period. The transformation in the man's demeanor was astonishing. It was as if a light had been switched on in a dusty, forgotten room. The tension in his shoulders eased, the guarded expression on his face melted away. He was no longer an anonymous old man. He was Alistair Dubois, found. Incroyable, he breathed, a wide, warm smile finally reaching his eyes. C'est incroyable. Personne ne parle ma langue ici. Ils aboient tous comme des chiens. Incredible. It's incredible. No one speaks my language here. They all bark like dogs. He made a subtle, almost invisible gesture towards the thorn table. Ellie couldn't suppress a small laugh. She replied in a rapid, idiomatic French, Les chiens qui aboient ne mordent pas, monsieur. Barking dogs don't bite, sir. Alistair let out a deep, rolling laugh that turned a few heads. Touché, Elara. Touché. He leaned forward, his entire posture shifting from defensive to engaged. Tell me, why is a graduate of the Sorbonne serving coffee to, what did he call me? A museum exhibit? Life, Ellie said, her voice catching slightly. Life is complicated, monsieur. Plans change. Plans, Alistair mused, his eyes darkening for a moment. Yes, I had plans for today as well. I was meant to observe some very important men. But I believe I have learned far more sitting in this corner than I ever would have in their boardroom. I'm sorry for their behavior, Ellie said, quietly in French. Do not be, Alistair replied, a new, harder edge to his voice. You learn everything about a man's character by how he treats someone he believes is beneath him. That man, he nodded towards Marcus Thorne. He believes he is a king, but he is merely a vandal with a bank account. For the next 20 minutes, in stolen moments between serving other tables, they spoke in hushed, conspiratorial French. He told her he was from Lyon, but his family had deep roots in Paris. He spoke of his passion for architecture and history. She told him about her grandfather, a watchmaker who had taught her the beauty of intricate old things. She told him how much she missed the quiet reverence of the Musée Carnavalet. It was the most profound human connection she had made in years. But the fragile bubble of their conversation was destined to burst. Marcus Thorne, his face flushed with wine and impatience, had noticed the quiet rapport. He didn't like it. He didn't like that the old man was smiling. He didn't like that his waitress was spending more time at table 17 than at his. Hey! The word was a gunshot in the quiet room. Marcus slammed his palm on the table, making the cutlery jump. The entire restaurant fell silent. Ellie froze. Yes, Mr. Thorne, she asked, turning to face him, her heart pounding. I've been trying to get the check for 10 minutes, he lied, his voice dripping with venom. And what are you doing? Flirting with the fossil in some foreign gibberish. What is this? The United Nations? I apologize, sir, Ellie said, her voice miraculously steady. I was simply confirming his satisfaction with the meal. I don't give a damn, Thorne spat, rising from his chair. He was a large, imposing man, and he used his physicality as a weapon, stepping into her personal space. I spend more on lunch in a week than you make in a year. I expect service. I expect your undivided attention, and I certainly don't expect to be ignored for him. He jabbed a thick, manicured finger in Alistair's direction. Alistair slowly placed his coffee cup back on its saucer. The delicate porcelain made a sharp, definitive clink. "Is there a problem here, monsieur?" he asked. His English was slow, measured, and still heavily accented, but the tone was no longer that of a weary traveller. It was the cold, hard tone of command. Marcus Thorne laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, the mummy speaks. Yeah, there's a problem, Grandpa. The problem is you, and her—" He turned back to Ellie. "I'm having a word with your manager. In fact, Abernathy!" Mr. Abernathy scurried over, his face pale with panic. "Yes, Mr. Thorne, my apologies. Is there an issue?" "There's an issue," Thorne said, puffing out his chest. "This waitress has been insolent and neglectful. She's been fraternizing with this vagrant instead of attending to my table. It's an insult to me and my family. I want her fired, now, or Thorne Development will be taking its business and its considerable expense account elsewhere." Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. That account was the lifeblood of the restaurant. Abernathy looked from the furious, powerful developer to the quiet, tired waitress. It wasn't a choice. It was a business decision. "Ellie," Abernathy said, his voice sharp and devoid of any warmth, "go to my office. You're done for the day." "But Mr. Abernathy, Tears started to well in her eyes. "Now!" he barked. To Thorne he was all smiles and apologies. "Mr. Thorne, I am so terribly sorry for this lapse. Your entire meal is, of course, on the house. Please sit." Thorne smirked, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He glanced over at Alistair. "See that, old man? That's how the world works. Money talks. You walk." Alistair stood up. He was not a tall man, but at that moment he seemed to possess an immense gravity that drew the attention of the entire room. He picked up his worn leather book. He reached into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket and withdrew a money clip. From it, he pulled a single, crisp bill, a $100 bill, and placed it gently on the table. "This is for the soup, which was excellent," he said to Ellie, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "And for your kindness, which was priceless. Do not worry about this." He gestured vaguely at the room, at the cowering manager and the smug developer. "This is not the end." He then turned his gaze to Marcus Thorne. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the man with an expression of profound, clinical disappointment, like a biologist observing a particularly primitive specimen. "You have a hearing with the City Preservation Committee on Friday at 10 a.m., Alistair stated. It was not a question. "Regarding the Argent building," Thorne's smirk faltered. "How the hell do you know about that? That's confidential." Alistair ignored him, buttoning his old jacket. "I would suggest you prepare your arguments with great care. The chairman of the committee is a dear friend of mine, and he has very little patience for, how did you put it, vandals with bank accounts." With that, Alistair Dubois turned and walked out of the restaurant. He didn't hurry. He moved with the unshakable confidence of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. The silence he left in his wake was deafening. "Who the hell was that?" Julian muttered, looking unnerved for the first time. "Nobody," Marcus Thorne snapped, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Just some crackpot who reads the city planning notices. Forget him. We won." He sat back down, but his victory suddenly felt hollow. Ellie, standing frozen by the kitchen doors, finally let a single hot tear trace a path down her cheek. She had lost her job for showing a stranger a moment of kindness. She numbly untied her apron, grabbed her purse from a locker, and walked out the back entrance into the grimy, rain-slicked alley. The stench of garbage and despair filled her lungs as she leaned against the cold brick wall and began to sob. She didn't notice the gleaming, black Bentley Mulsanne idling silently at the end of the alley. She didn't see its driver, a man in a severe black suit, step out and hold the rear door open for the old man in the tweed jacket. And she certainly couldn't hear the words Alistair Dubois spoke into a sleek satellite phone as the car pulled away from the curb. "Gerard," he said, his voice now stripped of any accent, sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "Cancel my lunch with the mayor, and get me everything you can find on an Ilara Vance, formerly of the Sorbonne, recently employed at Aurelia. Yes, immediately, and clear my schedule for the rest of the week. We have a museum to save." Sterling Vance's reflection in the elevator's polished brass doors showed him a man at the apex of his power. The navy-worsted wool suit was a shield of invincibility. His tie was a slash of crimson, a declaration of war. His hair was a marvel of engineering, gelled into a state of submission. The memory of the waitress and the old man had evaporated the second he stepped onto the street. They were inconsequential, a brief and irritating glitch in the otherwise flawless code of his existence. He was focused on a single objective: closing the deal on the Argent building. It was a pre-war architectural gem, a nuisance of history, standing in the way of his 80-story glass and steel monument to himself. He would gut it, sell the naming rights, and collect a bonus that could buy a small island. The elevator doors opened onto the 45th floor, the headquarters of Thorn Development Group. Normally the office was a symphony of aggressive commerce, phones ringing like alarms, brokers shouting buy and sell orders, the air thick with the scent of ambition and burnt coffee. Today, it was eerily silent. Sterling frowned. He strode past the receptionist, a young woman who suddenly found the contents of her desk drawer fascinating. He passed the bullpen where the junior associates usually buzzed with nervous energy. They were clustered in small, anxious groups, whispering. When they saw him, they scattered like pigeons. "What's going on?" Sterling muttered under his breath. "Vance!" The roar came from the corner office. It was Magnus Halloway, the senior partner, a man who treated business like a blood sport and his employees like gladiators. Sterling smoothed his tie and marched into the office. "Magnus, I'm just reviewing the final proposal for the Preservation Committee hearing. I've got a new angle on the structural instability argument that's pure gold." "There is no hearing," Magnus said. His voice was a low growl. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the grey Manhattan sky. He turned, and his face was a mottled, unhealthy shade of red. "The deal is dead." Sterling froze, a laugh catching in his throat. "What? That's impossible. We had the votes. I greased every palm on that committee." "You had nothing," Magnus snarled, slamming a heavy fist on his antique mahogany desk. "I got a call not 20 minutes ago, from the personal office of Alistair Dubois." The name hit Sterling like a physical blow. Dubois. The ghost. The mythical French industrialist who had been buying up historic New York real estate for decades through shell corporations. He was a legend, a phantom who was never seen. "Somebody saw him today, Sterling," Magnus hissed. "He called to personally inform me that not only is our offer for the Argent building rejected, but he has filed a counter-proposal to have it designated a national landmark, fully funded by his own foundation. He said, and I quote, that Thorn Development, lacks the soul and moral character to build a doghouse, let alone a skyscraper in his city. He called us a firm of uncultured barbarians led by a man who cannot distinguish a billionaire from a beggar. Sterling's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. The blood rushed from his head, leaving a cold, dizzying vacuum. A billionaire from a beggar. The restaurant, the tweed jacket, the scarf, the insults. Pappy. Oh no, Sterling whispered, the words barely audible. Oh no is right, Magnus growled, stalking around the desk until he was inches from Sterling's face. He mentioned a specific, rather distasteful incident at lunch today. Something about one of my top executives publicly humiliating him while he was attempting to enjoy a bowl of soup. Sterling, where did you have lunch? Sterling's collar suddenly felt like a hangman's noose. Aurelia, he choked out. But Magnus, you don't understand. The man looked like nothing. He was wearing clothes from a thrift shop. They sat him by the kitchen. That nothing, Magnus spat, his voice trembling with rage, is worth an estimated $20 billion. He is famously eccentric. He likes to walk the cities where he invests, to sit in cafes and restaurants, to see how people truly behave when they think no one of importance is watching. It's a test, you monumental idiot, and you didn't just fail it, you set the entire exam on fire. I can fix this, Sterling stammered, desperation clawing at his throat. I'll find him. I'll send him a case of wine. I'll apologize. I'll grovel. Magnus stared at him with the dead, pitiless eyes of a shark. You have 24 hours. If that landmark designation isn't withdrawn by close of business tomorrow, don't even bother cleaning out your desk. You're finished. I'll make sure you can't get a job selling hot dogs in this town. I'll fix it, Sterling promised, backing out of the room. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely type Alistair Dubois, New York residence, into the search bar. He had insulted the one man who could single-handedly destroy him. But Sterling Vance was a predator, a survivor. It was just a misunderstanding. He'd charm the old man, throw some money at the problem. He had never encountered a situation that couldn't be solved with a large enough check. He was too busy fighting for his bonus to realize that the woman he'd so casually crushed was about to be handed the keys to his kingdom. Ellie sat on the threadbare rug of her small queen's apartment, the eviction notice on her coffee table a stark white flag of surrender. Her bank account balance glowed ominously on her phone screen. 87 $40. Her grandfather's care facility had called that afternoon, a gentle but firm reminder that his account was past due. She had lost her job, her income, her hope, all for a bowl of soup. Stupid, she whispered to the empty room, hugging her knees to her chest. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Why couldn't you just keep your mouth shut? Her framed diploma from the Sorbonne hung crookedly on the wall, mocking her. Master of Arts, Art History, and Provenance Research. It was supposed to be her passport to a world of museums and galleries. Instead, it had become a souvenir from a life that no longer felt like her own. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from her apartment door. It wasn't the landlord. He preferred to shout through the thin wood. Panic seized her. Was it a process server? Had Thorne decided to sue her for emotional distress? She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A man in a tailored black suit stood in the dingy, cabbage-scented hallway. He was built like a refrigerator and wore a discreet earpiece. In his gloved hand, he held a thick, cream-colored envelope. Ellie undid the chain and opened the door a few inches. "Can I help you?" "Miss Elara Vance?" the man asked, his voice a polite, emotionless baritone. "Who's asking?" "I have been sent with a message for you. It is of an urgent nature." He held out the envelope. It was made of heavy, expensive cardstock, sealed with a deep blue wax stamp bearing an intricate D. It looked like a royal invitation. She took it, her fingers trembling. "What is this? Am I in some kind of trouble?" "Quite the contrary, miss," the man said. "The car is waiting for you downstairs." "What car?" "If you would please read the letter." She tore open the seal. Inside, a single card was inscribed with elegant, handwritten calligraphy. "Mademoiselle Vance. You offered a masterpiece of kindness in a gallery of cruelty. You recognized value where others saw only age. Now I should like to offer you an opportunity to put your true talents to use. My driver will bring you to me. Please do not concern yourself with your attire. Your integrity is all that is required. Alistair Dubois. Ellie's heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. Alistair Dubois, the old man. She remembered the name from her thesis research. The Dubois family were industrial titans, but their real legacy was in art patronage and preservation. They were ghosts of old Europe, their fortune as vast and quiet as the ocean. Is this real?" she asked the man, who remained impassive in the hallway. "Mr. Dubois does not engage in practical jokes," he replied. "We are on a rather tight schedule." Without a second thought, Ellie grabbed her worn coat and her purse. She didn't look back at the eviction notice, at the symbol of her failure. She followed the man down the rickety stairs and out onto the street. Parked at the curb, looking as out of place as a spaceship, was a black Bentley. The driver opened the rear door, and she slid into an interior of soft leather and polished wood that smelled faintly of old books and immense wealth. They drove in silence, the city's chaos gliding past the tinted windows. They didn't stop at an office building or a hotel. They pulled up to a discreet, limestone-faced residential building on a quiet, tree-lined street in the East 70s, the kind of building that didn't have a name, only a reputation. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was less a home and more a private museum. The walls were lined with books and paintings that made her art historian heartache. A small Degas sculpture here, a Monet landscape there. Alistair Dubois was standing by a grand fireplace, gazing into the flames. He was no longer wearing the tweed jacket. He was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored cashmere sweater and grey flannel trousers. He looked sharper, more vital, and radiated an aura of quiet, formidable power. "Elara," he said, turning with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome." "Mr. Dubois," she managed, her voice a squeak. I don't understand." "Please, sit." He gestured to a plush armchair. "Tea? Or perhaps something to fortify the nerves?" "Armagnac?" "Tea would be lovely," she whispered. A silent attendant appeared as if from nowhere with a silver tray. "I must begin with an apology," Alistair said, taking the seat opposite her. "My little social experiment at the restaurant had an unintended consequence. I did not anticipate that your act of decency would cost you your livelihood. I grossly underestimated the vulgarity of Mr. Thorne." "It wasn't your fault," Ellie said, cradling the warm porcelain teacup like a lifeline. "Mr. Thorne is... well, he's Mr. Thorne. Fear is his currency," Alistair mused. "But loyalty, Elara, that is a rare treasure. You defended the dignity of a stranger at great personal cost. In my world, that is a quality more valuable than any stock or bond." He picked up a thick file from a nearby table. "I took the liberty of looking into your background. Sorbonne, summa cum laude. A thesis on the provenance of art looted during World War II, with a focus on the Rothschild collection. fluent in French, German, and English. Is this correct?" Ellie blushed. "Yes, but I haven't used any of that in years. Life, as I said. Life required you to do what was necessary," he finished for her, his eyes kind. "The world is foolish. It lets its treasures gather dust." He paused, his expression growing serious. "I am in the process of establishing a new foundation here in New York. Its purpose will be to locate and repatriate artworks stolen from French families during the war. It is a deeply personal mission for me. My own family lost a great deal." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "I need someone to run it. Not a bureaucrat or a lawyer. I need someone with a scholar's mind and a detective's eye. Someone who understands the soul of a piece of art, not just its price tag. Someone who can tell a masterpiece from a forgery, even when one is disguised in old tweed." He slid the file across the table to her. "I want you to be the director of the Dubois Foundation. You will have a limitless budget and my full support. Your first task will be to save the Argent Building from Marcus Thorne." Ellie stared at him, dumbfounded. "The Argent Building? But why?" "Because," Alistair said, a flicker of pain in his eyes, "deep within its walls, hidden behind a false fireplace in the old library, is a painting by Vermeer that was stolen from my grandparents' apartment in 1942. It is the last piece of their legacy I have yet to recover. Thorne wants to demolish that building. He wants to erase my history. You, Ilara, are going to stop him." She opened the file. It was an employment contract. Her eyes scanned the details, her brain struggling to process the numbers. The salary was more than she had earned in the last 5 years combined. There was a housing allowance, a research budget, a signing bonus that would solve all her problems in an instant. "Mr. Dubois, this is charity," she stammered. "No," he said firmly, "it is not charity. It is a partnership. I have a problem named Marcus Thorne. He thinks history is a burden. He thinks beauty is an obstacle. I need to teach him a lesson in permanence." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of hope and challenge. "On Friday, at the Preservation Committee hearing, he will present his arguments for demolition. He thinks he will be facing a few underfunded historians. He will be facing you." Alistair extended his hand. "So, Ilara Vance, are you ready to stop serving the soup and start saving history?" Ellie looked at the contract. She thought of her grandfather, of the beauty of old things, of the ugly, sneering face of Marcus Thorne. She thought of the Vermeer, hidden and waiting. She took Alistair's hand, and her grip was strong and sure. "I'm ready, Mr. Dubois." The next 48 hours were not a whirlwind makeover. They were a deep-dive immersion into a world Ellie had only ever dreamed of. Alistair didn't give her a new wardrobe, he gave her an arsenal. Tuesday was spent not with a stylist, but in a climate-controlled vault beneath the city, surrounded by the Dubois family archives. With the help of Alistair's archivist, Gerard, she pored over faded architectural blueprints of the Argent Building, original construction ledgers from 1928, and heartbreaking letters from Alistair's grandmother describing the lost Vermeer, the concert-goer, in exquisite detail. Thorne's argument will be that the building is structurally unsound and historically insignificant, Alistair explained via video call from his Paris office. "You must prove him wrong. Find its secrets, Ilara." And she did. Cross-referencing the blueprints with the building's original electrical plans, she discovered a series of hidden cavities in the walls designed for reinforced steel supports that were never installed due to the 1929 market crash. They weren't a sign of weakness. They were a sign of ambition. She found the original mason's name, an Italian immigrant named Giovanni, and spent hours in the public library's microfiche archives, eventually finding a small 1930 newspaper article praising his intricate, hand-carved limestone facade. It wasn't just a building, it was a work of art. Wednesday was strategy. Alistair flew in his top legal counsel, a sharp, elegant Parisian woman named Solène. They didn't prep Ellie on finance, they prepped her on rhetoric. They staged a mock hearing in the penthouse library. "Thorne will be aggressive," Solène advised, pacing before the fireplace. "He will try to dismiss you. He will call you an emotional, unqualified academic. You cannot let him." "So I fight back?" Ellie asked. "No," Alistair interjected from his armchair. "You do not descend to his level. You do not fight. You teach. You present your evidence with such calm, irrefutable authority that his aggression looks like the tantrum of a child." By the end of the day, Ellie was no longer just presenting facts. She was weaving a narrative. She spoke of Giovanni the Mason, of the ambition of pre-Depression New York, of the cultural significance of the building as a haven for European artists and intellectuals fleeing the rise of fascism. She was giving the building a voice. Thursday, Alistair gave her one final piece of her armor. It was a simple, dark navy suit, impeccably tailored, and a small, antique silver locket. "My grandmother's," he said softly. "She believed that true strength was quiet. Wear it as a reminder of what and who you are fighting for." Friday morning arrived, grey and drizzling. The hearing room at City Hall was panelled in dark, intimidating wood. Marcus Thorne and his sons sat at one long table, flanked by a team of expensive-looking lawyers. They were laughing, confident, schmoozing with committee members. Ellie walked in alone. She carried a single, slim leather portfolio. Thorne saw her, and his smile faltered for a second, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He recognized her, but the context was so jarringly wrong that his brain couldn't process it. The terrified waitress from Aurelia didn't belong here. He quickly dismissed it, turning back to his conversation. "The committee will now hear the petition from the Thorne Development Group regarding the property at 712 Park Avenue South," the chairman announced. Marcus Thorne strode to the podium. For 20 minutes, he delivered a slick, powerful presentation filled with charts and graphs detailing structural decay, asbestos, and the economic benefits of his proposed skyscraper. He called the Argent building a dilapidated relic and an obstacle to progress. "In conclusion," he boomed, "while we respect the past, we cannot be held hostage by it. It is time to look to the future." He sat down to a smattering of applause from his team. "The committee now recognizes the opposition," the chairman said, looking down at his papers. "Miss Ilara Vance, representing the Dubois Foundation." A murmur went through the room. Thorne's head snapped up. He stared at Ellie as she walked calmly to the podium, the name Dubois echoing in the silent room. The color drained from his face. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee," Ellie began, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Ilara Vance. I am an art historian, and I am the director of the newly formed Dubois Foundation for Historic Preservation." She didn't look at Thorne. She addressed the committee directly. "Mr. Thorne speaks of the future. I am here to speak of the value of the past. He calls the Argent building a dilapidated relic. I am here to tell you that it is a masterpiece." She didn't use a PowerPoint. She used a story. She placed a single, enlarged black and white photograph on an easel. It showed the face of a proud, mustached man, Giovanni the Mason. She spoke of his craftsmanship. She presented the original ledgers, showing he used reinforced concrete, a cutting-edge technique for its time. She showed the committee the hidden structural cavities, arguing they made the building perfect for modern retrofitting, not demolition. Mr. Thorne claims the building is insignificant, she continued, her voice gaining strength, but he is mistaken. From 1938 to 1945, the Argent Building housed the offices of the Emergency Rescue Committee, a private organization that helped issue visas to over 2,000 artists and intellectuals fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe. Marc Chagall, Max Ernst, André Breton, they all passed through the doors of that relic. The room was utterly silent now, captivated. Thorne was no longer smirking. He was staring at her, his mouth slightly agape. "But the building's greatest secret," Ellie said, her voice dropping slightly, "is not in its history, but within its walls." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne for the first time. "Mr. Thorne, in your haste to create the future, you have overlooked a priceless piece of the past. A masterpiece, in fact. A painting by Johannes Vermeer entitled The Concert Goer, stolen by the Nazis in 1942 and believed to be lost forever." Gasps rippled through the committee. "That's absurd," Thorne blurted out, jumping to his feet. "She's making it up. There's no proof." "On the contrary," Ellie said calmly. She slid a set of documents across the podium to the chairman. "This is a sworn affidavit from the son of the building's last private owner, confirming a secret compartment was built into the library fireplace at the request of a French tenant in 1941. And this," she held up a small, leather-bound book, "is the personal diary of the tenant's wife, describing the painting and its hiding place in meticulous detail. It was Alistair's grandmother's diary." "And finally," Ellie said, her voice ringing with conviction, "we have a witness." On cue, the large doors at the back of the room opened. Alistair Dubois walked in. He was no longer in disguise. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. He moved with an aura of immense power and quiet dignity. He walked to the podium and stood beside Ellie. "Good morning," he said to the stunned committee. "My name is Alistair Dubois. The French tenant was my father. The painting is my family's legacy, and the building is my property." He turned his cold blue eyes on Marcus Thorne. "You tried to demolish my home, Monsieur Thorne. You tried to erase my history, and you insulted my director." He turned back to the committee. "The Dubois Foundation is prepared to purchase the Argent Building at twice its market value, fully fund its restoration, and transform it into a public museum dedicated to the art and artists of the wartime generation. We will not only preserve the past, we will share it with the future." The chairman looked at Thorne, who had collapsed back into his chair, his face the color of ash. He looked at Alistair Dubois and the poised, brilliant woman beside him. He looked at the evidence. He banged his gavel. "Petition for demolition. Denied. The committee will move to recommend the Argent Building for immediate landmark status." The aftermath was not a single, explosive event, but a series of quiet, decisive shifts. Marcus Thorne's empire, built on the precarious foundation of leveraged debt, crumbled when news of the failed Argent deal became public. His creditors, spooked by his public humiliation at the hands of Alistair Dubois, called in their loans. Thorne Development Group was forced into bankruptcy. The last Ellie heard, Julian and Leo were fighting over the scraps in court, and Marcus had been forced to sell his penthouse to cover his legal fees. The weeks that followed the hearing were a blur of architects, engineers, and conservators. Ellie spent her days not in a high-rise office, but on site at the Argent Building, a hard hat perched on her head, her designer suit traded for practical trousers and boots. She worked alongside Alistair, the two of them poring over blueprints, their conversations a comfortable mix of French and English, of structural engineering and art history. One crisp autumn afternoon, a team of specialists carefully removed the marble mantelpiece of the library fireplace. Behind it, just as Alistair's grandmother had described, was a shallow, lead-lined compartment. As they pried it open, a collective gasp went through the room. There, wrapped in oilcloth and perfectly preserved, was the concert-goer, a woman, bathed in ethereal light, her fingers poised over the keys of a virginal. Her eyes seemed to look out across the centuries, filled with a quiet, knowing sadness. Alistair reached out and gently touched the corner of the frame, his eyes glistening with tears. He didn't speak. He simply nodded at Ellie, a look of profound gratitude passing between them. The Dubois Foundation officially opened its doors a year later. The Argent Building, now renamed the Dubois Center for Wartime Art, was a triumph. Its limestone facade had been cleaned to a brilliant white, and its restored interiors were a hushed sanctuary of history and beauty. The concert-goer was its centerpiece, hanging alone on a wall of deep crimson velvet. Ellie, as the center's director, was no longer invisible. She gave lectures, met with scholars from around the world, and spent her days surrounded by the beauty she had fought to save. She had paid off her grandfather's debts, and he now lived in a comfortable, sunny room in the best facility in the state, his walls covered with postcards she sent from her research trips to Paris, Vienna, and Amsterdam. One evening, long after the museum had closed, she was walking through the silent galleries with Alistair. "It's beautiful," she said softly, looking at the Vermeer. "Even more than I imagined." "Beauty survives, Ilara," Alistair said, standing beside her. "It is resilient. It simply needs champions to protect it from the vandals of the world." He smiled. "Speaking of which, I received a curious piece of mail today." He handed her an envelope. It was postmarked from a small town in upstate New York. Inside was a clumsily written letter. "Dear Mr. Dubois, I was the manager at Aurelia. After you and Miss Vance left, the restaurant lost its reputation and went out of business. I lost my job. For a long time, I was angry. But I have a new job now, at a small diner up here. People are kinder. The food is simple. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I learned that treating people with respect is more important than any corporate account. Sincerely, Howard Abernathy." Ellie folded the letter and handed it back to Alistair. "Perhaps there is hope for him yet," Alistair mused. "There's hope for everyone," Ellie said, a deep, genuine smile lighting up her face. "Sometimes they just need to be reminded of what's truly valuable." They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, two quiet guardians watching over a masterpiece that had been saved from the noise and the fury of the world. In the end, Marcus Thorne was right about one thing. Money talked. But what he had never understood, and what Ellie Vance now knew in the very core of her being, was that history, beauty, and a simple act of kindness whispered a far more powerful and permanent truth.